Probably. So we'll just wait a few more minutes.
Where is Greenwood?
Who did you, about 25 minutes
Work with here, Fritz Mueller and Bruce Marion
due east of Annapolis?
and Leonard Weiss in economics. I have a joint degree in economics and I graduated here in '77.
That's not very far.
So now I'm at, here, I'll give you my card. I'm at the University of Connecticut.
Still there.
And I've done a lot of work on co-op theory.
Down the questions as planned, right? No change in the...
Those
baseball questions? No, I'm not
Do you
going
know Bill Sipple, a lawyer up in Minneapolis? He's an antitrust lawyer. He graduated with me.
Patrick, all these mics are veterinary at all times.
So do you have a dairy farm? Or you do?
They're on, never careful.
Yeah, right.
Here in Wisconsin someplace?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, good for you. Were you? Good for you.
Yeah, no, that was...
Well, I had 9 sheep and 2 goats, 7.5 acres.
Yeah, pretty country.
Well, we'll try to be nice to you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was real pleased to see that the farmers mostly stacked their pitchforks outside.
Yeah, there you go. They're not French, Peter. If they were French, they'd be in here.
Right.
No doubt about that. Yeah, by Pete.
2 more minutes and then we'll go.
You're very close to that.
Nice man.
Yeah, I just 65 minutes.
Who has a really nice farm just north of here? North and to the...
Here, Massey?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to take your seats, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Lights are bright, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sean Jones is the size. Great operator.
They're even brighter now.
It was the one drawback of this location.
What's that?
To set this up was that it is more of a stage.
You can't see anybody out there until your eyes adjust,
Yeah.
if they ever adjust.
Like you said, it's hard to see the audience out of the bright light because I've never
Secretary.
sat up here. So.
I haven't done this in a while.
Well, introduce yourself to
But you've never said that?
Hi. Bill, what? Ed?
Pat Coleman with
Coleman, hi.
Justice.
Justice, I'm
Yeah.
Ron Cotterall from the University of Connecticut. You're DOJ.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi.
Old
Are you
student
gonna-
of
Are
Peter's.
you? Oh,
Yeah, a few years back. So I'm going to do the questions.
okay, good. Yeah.
We're stopping.
I think Ms. Barney's probably left. I don't think she can
Yeah.
hear us.
No, she's not going to hear us directly. The staff is what you're talking to.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, that's all right. Probably got longer memories.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. We're now going to start the afternoon session where we'll be doing 3 panels. And we're going to first begin, the first panel will be on trends in the dairy industry. I'm going to briefly introduce myself and then set the stage and then get out of the way of the very experienced and distinguished panelists we have up here today. My name is Josh Sovin. I run the group at the Antitrust Division that prosecutes antitrust violations in the dairy sector. And as the Assistant Attorney General talked about this morning, that involves reviews of mergers, such as the Dean acquisition of the Foremost Farms Consumer Products Division, as well as investigations of anti-competitive conduct by firms with market power. It is a special privilege for me as an antitrust enforcer to be here today. Sound competition policy requires an excellent understanding of how markets work, and we can't get that in Washington. We actually have to go out into the market and talk to people such as yourself to understand the on-the-ground reality and how it really works. So with that, let me briefly introduce our panelists. Again, they are very experienced and we'll get going. The topics we're going to cover and try to leave some time for questions or briefly. We're going to talk about the co-op structure and regulation. We're going to talk about the well-known trend amongst all of you about the decline in the number of small farms. We'll then move a little bit more into the regulatory structure with a focus on the producer-handler exception and more generally the milk marketing order system. And then we'll finish most likely with a discussion about a topic that was a big issue this morning, which is consolidation, concentration, and market behavior in the downstream processing and the retailer markets. So very briefly, our panelists first are Ron Cotterall. He's an agricultural economist at the University of Connecticut. Peter Carstensen probably needs no introduction to many of you. He's a law professor at the University of Wisconsin. Bob Kropp, also an agricultural economist at the University of Wisconsin. Gerald Heatwell, he's a farmer from Delaware. Mark Pepperzak, he is just to make sure I've got his title correctly, the Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Organic Dairy. Pete Kappelman, who is the Chairman of the Board of Directors of Land O'Lakes Cooperative. And then last but not least, Jim Goodman, who's an organic dairy farmer from here in Wisconsin. So let me begin with co-ops. As the Assistant Attorney General said this morning, and the Secretary of Agriculture said this morning, there appears to be widespread consensus about the benefits and the value of co-ops in the market. However, there does appear to be sort of a healthy debate as to how, if at all, those co-ops should be regulated or not. Peter Carstensen has given a fair amount of thought and devoted a fair amount of research to that topic, so I will begin with one of our hosts and turn it over to Peter.
Thank you very much. Before I turn to the co-op thing, I want to flag to everyone that at our 3:45 break, the law school has made a treaty with the ice cream department of the university to bring over some ice cream for you all to have during your break. We'll be right outside here on the patio. You're in Wisconsin, it's Dairy Month. What better than to have some university ice cream on top of that? It is almost 15 years ago, I began to get into some dairy and other competition issues. It's taken 10 to 15 years to get those issues on the front burner. I'm hoping it doesn't take quite that long to get some of the issues that I see as really important with respect to especially large cooperatives. Capper-Volstead and related statutes, the most recent I think was adopted about 1934. World has changed. We need to think a lot more about where and how to deal with cooperatives, and especially large cooperatives. A co-op often represents the second or third largest investment that a farm family has after their farm itself. It is an investment that, unfortunately, in many circumstances, it seems to me, does not have the transparency, the governance rules, the kind of oversight that is necessary. And you've heard, and I want to second this, co-ops are very, very important. But they need, again, I think, especially large ones, a different kind of oversight. Before the 1930s, we had a public capital market in which large corporations were not accountable for their false reports of earnings and profits. They were not required to disclose information. They were not required to have a governance system which allowed their shareholders actively to participate in the governance of the corporation. With some cooperatives having thousands of members and billions of dollars, they look an awful lot like those early American corporations. What we have found with the public capital market is when you regulate in terms of transparency, governance rules, and a national oversight of the internal activities of the corporation, it improves the behavior of the corporation. It provides the investors, the owners of those corporations, a degree of certainty, a degree of reliability as to what's going on. I think that the classic economics talks about this as the separation of ownership and control of a corporation. The same thing happens with cooperatives. We have seen in recent history some fairly serious problems of sweetheart deals, of funds suddenly moving out from the cooperative without appropriate approval. And I've had calls from various co-op members of large co-ops specifically, worrying about what management is up to, how do they get the information. We do not have a systematic way of assuring the owners of co-ops that they have that information. So number one reform that I think ought to come is to put the large co-ops either under the 34 Securities Act, which is the basis on which the SEC would regulate, or something comparable in terms of reporting, disclosure, and an oversight to make sure that the books are being honestly kept, that are being audited by appropriate federal officials. Right now, USDA has no authority to do that. And that there are civil and criminal liability for managers who misuse the resources of the enterprise. That got highlighted very recently by a Supreme Court decision that cut back on one of our few other criminal statutes that can be used to deal with misappropriation. So we really need to make sure that there is that kind of governance oversight for corporations. I think for co-ops, you probably want a somewhat different governance system than you use for ordinary corporations. I also think, as a second level, that the no outside investor, 8%, no outside equity investor, the 8% maximum return ought to be revisited. I think there are important tax laws that need to be retained, but large co-ops need the flexibility in their capital structure that comes from revisiting, again, rules that were adopted in 1922. They may have made sense then. I don't think they make sense now. Lastly, there is this little antitrust thing that seems to worry a lot of folks, that somehow they're all going to go to jail if the Capra-Volstead antitrust exemption is repealed. I know a lot about antitrust law, and I've been trying to figure out what it is that co-op managers are up to that is, but for this exemption, a felony and would send them to prison. I'd like that disclosure because I don't think they're doing that. And if they are, the other question then would be, why are not farmers doing a whole lot better if these guys are committing price-fixing felonies out there, raising prices, extorting money in some way? Bottom line, though, the way the antitrust laws impact with co-ops anyway doesn't really matter a whole lot whether there is an exemption or not. There are a couple of places where it would be important. I'd like to have it rethought. If it's the Holy Grail, if it is the Bible of the co-op movement that they must be exempt from antitrust law, given the way Capra-Volstead's been interpreted, I could live with that. I do want to deal with the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act, but that's a question that'll come up a little bit later.
Pete Kappelman, Professor Carstensen appears to see some room for some regulatory changes. Do you agree, or how do you think about the subject?
Well, first of all, let me express my appreciation for the invitation today. My family milks 400 cows. In addition to being chairman of the Land Lakes Board, my primary job in life is to farm. And my family milks 400 cows on the land purchased by my great-grandfather. It's great to be back at the UW. My oldest two children are here and are now the fourth generation of UW-Madison attendees. Proud of the job they're doing here. When I get asked about co-ops being big, I wonder about who gets to decide what big is, or too big, or big enough. And I wonder about what you might use for criteria. But what I think that what really matters to farmers is whether their cooperative is effective, truly valuable to them in a business world where farmers seem to continue to lose margin in the value chain of food production. Cooperatives are one of the last vestiges of hope left for dairy farmers as they attempt to bargain effectively with the burgeoning size of processors and retailers. I've been told that Land O'Lakes is big. The dairy side of our business in a typical year has about $4 billion of sales. Some might say that's big. One of the customers we deal with is called Walmart. They are approximately 100 times larger than we are. Kroger's is 20 times larger than we are. We do not feel the power of big as they negotiate to bring down the price of food, and we are wrangling to negotiate the best price we can for our members' products. So I ask all of you, who is big and what is big enough? According to a 2007 USDA Cooperative Development Report, 83% of all U.S. milk was marketed through 155 cooperatives. That number's grown steadily over the years, yet co-op membership is not mandatory. As a dairy producer, there is no inherent home for my milk. I have to find a market for it. I chose a market where I invest my equity in value-added branded products that allow me to share in the manufacturing and marketing margins of the milk I produce, sharing in that value chain, down the value chain. So how do producers ensure that their co-op remains relevant and beneficial? The answer is simple, but it involves a lot of hard work. Good governance. Good governance is not dictated by size, be it big or small. It's a function of effectiveness. Most co-ops use a form of representative democracy, and they do it pretty well. Public companies are regulated by the SEC in an attempt to protect investors by dictating accounting and financial reporting procedures. And those companies are also required to use sound judgment, or legally required to use sound judgment, sound governance, and moral business practices. It's tough to legislate morality. A cooperative business is our stockholders' business. The members engage. Their livelihood and their equity investment depends on it. We hold numerous member meetings. I can't tell you how many chicken dinners I've had over the years, but I can tell you who serves the best chicken around the state. At those meetings, we elect delegates. We choose the director candidates versus a public company where most director candidates are handpicked by management. So at our member meetings, we choose the director candidates, we elect directors, we discuss the policy affecting our producers, and we update the members on their business. In fact, when Land O'Lakes was a public registrant, our governance system was less effective because we could only discuss our members' business with them after we had made a public release of that information. We had less information for our producers, and as a result, discussions with members about their business became less relevant. The fiduciary role of elected co-op leaders is a tremendous responsibility. It's not one that I take lightly. Our members expect sound financial reporting and auditing. It's the board members' responsibility to deliver on that expectation. Other fiduciary roles include oversight of management, policy setting, and communication with members. I get judged on the job I'm doing at every member meeting, but especially at election time. It's quite simple. If I'm not delivering on member expectations, I get replaced. So in summary, I think co-op governance is alive and well. It's our business, and we own it.
Thank you. Gerald Heatwald, we'll talk some more with specificity about the situation for small farmers, but before we turn to that topic in general, your thoughts on more regulation, less regulation, different regulation for co-ops?
Well, Josh, I concur with everything that Pete just said. And let me say, in terms of governance and information, I think if you look at, and we had here on the panel this morning, members of Congress and the Senate, I think at the cooperative level, we have a much more robust representation system than we do in our country, in our democracy, and I don't think any of us want to change that. Let me just pick at a few things in a little different angle from what Pete just said. Look, I'm a small dairy farmer. My wife and partner this morning milked 61 cows on the 82-acre farmstead that her grandfather started. Our business is sustained through use of about 5 different cooperatives in various aspects of our business. And over the years, I've marketed my milk from the farm through 4 different cooperatives, 2 small local cooperatives over the years, and then a bigger regional cooperative, and now through a national cooperative. They're all operated under Capra Volstead. Their method was the same. The difference is the effectiveness that we can have working together in a bigger mass, bigger scope. You know, I have great respect for for these professors. My brother is a professor at Virginia Tech, a PhD and research professor, and he'll tell me that you can take two professors that are equally qualified and come up with three opinions that are on different ends of the spectrum. What I will say is that as a dairy farmer, my life, my income depends on the choices that are made. And the professor's choices don't impact his income or his tenure or his future. So, you know, from a standpoint of the impact that it has to me as a farmer, I'm very intense, and farmers are very intensely committed and tied into what goes on in these kind of forums. You know, like Pete, I'd say, you know, what defines a large cooperative? We tended to think about numbers of farmers, but we've got farm cooperatives in this country that market billions of pounds of milk, and you can count their members by the tens or the hundreds. We have cooperatives that market the same billions of pounds of milk in this country, and you count their members by the thousands. You've got cooperatives that market their milk through further processing, a large percentage of their milk, versus cooperatives that just take it directly from the farm to a different customer. So what defines a larger cooperative? We work in a world that several countries have one cooperative effectively for the whole country. So, you know, I think that you'll find that no matter what the cooperative structure we have here in the U.S., the members that own and are a part of those cooperatives all find value in those organizations, or they wouldn't stay. In fact, you know, in our organization, each year members have an option. In the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania area, one of the areas that I represent, I just counted last night, there's 16 different people that'll pick up milk, procure milk or market milk from any farm in that area, about 6 or 7 cooperatives and 8 to 10 proprietary companies. Despite this, and that's not just unique to the Lancaster County area, but despite this, for every 2 farmers that chose to market their milk elsewhere for whatever reason, 7 chose to market with us. Let me put this size in just a little different context. In the top 6 dairy states, 2 in the West Coast, California and Idaho, 2 here in the beautiful heartland of the country, Wisconsin and Minnesota, 2 in the Northeast where I'm from, Pennsylvania and New York, DFA's market share, member share of milk, runs from 6% to 14%. There's lots of choices, lots of opportunities. Contrast that with the #1 cheese retailer that's #1 in market after market after market with no close second, and operates under different structure, different governance structure, and look at retailer that is #1 in market after market after market with few markets where there's even a close #2, and tell me where you think the market power is. These companies, no matter how you measure them, as Pete said, are many, many times larger than even the largest cooperative, and growing, getting larger. Who do you think needs the regulation the most? Do I think that we need more regulation as cooperatives, which is just by extension us as farmers? I think the answer is clearly no matter what size the cooperative is.
Thank you. Mark Pepperzak, as the head of Aurora, what is your perspective on the topic?
I've been a dairy producer since the 1970s. And since then, Aurora has been a producer member of several cooperatives across the country, big and large. And quite frankly, after this nearly 40 years of experience, I would say that the cooperatives generally failed us. I think they stifle competition. I think they stifle innovation. The fact of the matter is that if you want to do anything on your own, if you, for example, in the early 1990s, when I decided that we ought to take one of our farms and make it organic, so I went with the concept of organic to our co-ops, more than one, I might add. They basically said, don't do it, we'll fight you. Anything that's innovative, anything that's out of the box, no, can't do it. I remember at that time asking for a list of members. I'd like to talk to them directly. They wouldn't give me the list of members. I remember trying to approach a board of directors meeting. They shut down the board of directors meeting before I showed up. Having said all that, co-ops play a good role. But what really surprised me from this morning is people kept talking about how the system is broken. The system is broken. But at the same time, they're saying co-ops are fine. Well, co-ops are very much part of the system. I don't think they've done a pretty good job, frankly. Somebody said something about that they didn't feel like they had an ear in Washington, didn't have a spokesman. Well, what's the co-op doing? Where are the co-ops? Contrary to Gerald's experience, when I think about Colorado, we have 160, 70 producers, 20 processors, one co-op, one choice. If you want to go to any of those 20 producer processors, you're out of luck. It happens that way in much of the country. Maybe different in Lancaster County. Anyway, so in 2003, what we are today is, Aurora Organic today is 5 farms with 4,900 acres of pasture. And we are vertically integrated. We have our own plant. We have our own farms. And quite frankly, we don't have a lot of choice. It's the only way we can operate in the business. The co-ops wouldn't help us get the milk, never mind keeping us out of the processing channels. It wasn't a choice. I do think there should be some regulatory changes in terms of how cooperatives are treated. I think it's necessary to get co-ops in the basket of facilitating innovation and competition as opposed to the opposite, because effectively that's what they've done in my experience with us.
At the Antitrust Division, we have many, many lawyers, and I'm one of those, so I like to think we're doing a pretty good job. But we also have many, many economists, and when we get stuck, we always turn to the economists to bail us out or to wrap us up. So with that, I will turn to Professor Kropp to offer his perspective on the co-op regulation issue.
Well, I don't think we need a great change in regulation. The Captive-Volstead Act passed way back in 1922, and the purpose was to try to equal out the imbalance of economic power between farmers and their buyers. And that's just, and all the Captive-Volstead Act does is give limited exemption antitrust, not total. They're still subject to any predatory practices. And basically does allow farmers to organize, to bargain, process, and market on behalf to try to bring some balance to economic power. And there's been a lot of consolidation of co-ops, mergers, consolidations through time, and the reason that has happened is, well, farmers have changed, modern transportation processing, markets have changed, the size of processing plants for efficiency has changed. So the board of directors of co-ops have been responsible to change their structure to respond to the changes in the market conditions. The thing is that the concentration of food industry has been much greater beyond the farm and cooperative level. So really the imbalance today between, say, farmers and their buyers is probably greater. Maybe it was back in 1922. So they still need the protection, the right to organize and bargain. There's a little talk this morning, what's big? Co-ops are small business. There is about 155 co-ops in existence today, and of those 155, 109 are pure bargaining, relatively small bargaining co-ops. There's only 25 that actually operate processing facilities. And they don't dominate any real aspect of the dairy industry. I mean, they have about 71% of the butter and 96% of the powder. When it comes to the natural cheese, we heard a lot about that, dry milk prices, actually their market share has declined down to about 26%, back in 2002, about 34%. So if you compare dairy cooperatives to their customers or their customers' customers, they're really small businesses. We mentioned the Walmart, business this morning, the number one on Fortune 500 company. They have about $230 or so billion on the food side. But if you take our largest, our agriculture co-ops, there's only 2 that appear on Fortune 500 list. One is CHS, the largest co-op, number 91, with sales of about 26 billion, but that's a diversified farm supply petroleum. One in dairy, and that's Land O'Lakes, about 10 billion. They list 226. but I think dairy, as Pete Coppin said, is only about $4 billion of that. So if you look at the Kroger's and Super Values, Crafting, everybody is on Fortune 500 with revenues much greater. If I take all the dairy co-ops and add the total revenue together, it's less than $40 billion, all of them together. And one way we like to measure concentration is what does the top four do? If I take the top four dairy co-ops, the top four market a little over 6 billion pounds of milk a year annually. That's a lot of milk, but not a lot. There's another 8 between the 3 to 6 billion, but over half market less than 500 million pounds of milk in a year. Take the 10 largest dairy co-ops throw together, they have about 57% market share. If you take, DFA, which is the largest co-op, has around 20% of the market. And you get California Dairies, number 2, drops down about 9%. Land O'Lakes is about 7% of the total market, so pretty small. Any one co-op by themselves do not have the sufficient market power to really influence that market, and so under the Captive Volstead Act, we allow a marketing agency in common where co-ops go together and bargain together to have an influence on that market. And that's been successful. If I looked last year at Federal Order data, the over-order premiums that co-ops were able to negotiate with the bottlers averaged about $2.45 a hundredweight additional revenue. And why is that? Well, a lot of the focus is on the fluid side of this business. Cows are milked every day, but milk is seasonal, demand is seasonal. Even within the year when you have holidays, schools in, schools out, the amount of milk needed by a bottler varies considerably. Early in the history of dairy co-ops, they've taken on the responsibility of coordinating this needed milk for fluid versus other uses around and balance it. That is a market-wide service that makes the whole marketing system more efficient. It benefits farmers, processors, and believe it or not, consumers. So some of this over-order money that's bargained for is needed to pay for and compensate the co-ops, providing market-wide services that balancing the market, moving milk around where it's best needed. And it does result in higher prices of farmers. Our acquisition is, some cases here, is that co-ops underpay farmers. Again, if you look at mailbox prices, which the actual price that farmers get, and compare it to Federal Order prices, believe it or not, they average higher in all markets except a couple. All markets last year, it averaged about 38 cents higher, in some markets $1 or more higher mailbox prices. Means competition is there. They're paying farmers more than the minimum prices that are required under Federal Orders. Another topic, and this is too big, a lot of the criticism, I think, is the relationship of co-ops, say, with a bottler, full supply arrangements, that keeps out others that participate in Federal Orders. Well, that may be true, but the full supply arrangement that benefits the market. The difficulty is today that 97% of milk is grade A. The major purpose of Federal Order is to assure consumers got milk to drink. Not all that milk's needed for that purpose. The average utilization of all orders is 37%. There's only 3 orders that have utilizations over 45%. There's more grade A milk available than is needed, but yet everybody wants to participate in the Federal Order because the fluid milk price is the highest, the manufacturer price is lower, there's a weighted average, so the fluid leaves some money in, the manufacturers draw it out, but it's not all needed. So some of the criticism of those relationships between co-ops and their buyers maybe it's really a Federal Order issue we look at, some changes need to be made there or what have you. But if we allow everybody to participate in the Federal Order, it kind of waters down the pool, whatever. So that's kind of a complicated thing, but I think there's a lack of understanding of this marketing system and pricing system that criticize co-ops for it, and really is not a co-op issue. So, and one last thing as far as governance, every member of the co-op has 1 member, 1 vote at some level. The larger co-ops, naturally, they have districts, elect delegates, what have you, then vote for a board of directors who are very accountable. They're active dairy farmers, they're very accountable. They're accountable for the co-op, held responsible for the co-op and to protect members' equity. They hire management, they set policy, and they show management accountable. So the governance, I think, is pretty good. It's to get qualified people to run for these board of directors on these co-ops, but I have no difficulty with that. There's always communication problems with members in that, how do you communicate what's going on for transparency. I think co-ops are trying to do a good job of that with websites, newsletters, district meetings, et cetera. So anyway, I think I see no need for change in regulation.
All right, thank you. Unambiguously, one of the most profound and dynamic trends in the dairy industry, of course, is the reduction in the number of small farms. The statistics were referred to this morning. They're well known to people in this audience. Jim Goodman is a small dairy farmer, and your thoughts on that topic, please. Well, let me actually, a little bit more of a segue to put a sharper point on it. At the end of the day, the bottom line, what do you think is driving it? Are those trends consistent? And what should be done about it from a regulatory standpoint or a competition standpoint?
Well, I guess it's really easy to answer in just a few words, and I don't think it's just a small farmer's point of view either. The milk price is too low. I mean, why are you going to continue to farm if you can't make a living doing it? If somebody told a lawyer, well, I'm only going to pay you $2 an hour for your work, they'd probably say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do it for that. Many farmers don't have that option. They have loans to pay off, and from my point of view as a small farmer, it's maybe a little bit more critical because there is some truth to the size of scale, excuse me, the economy of scale. Credit is sometimes more difficult for small farms to get. I know I went in our local bank, that's probably been 5-6 years ago, to borrow money for fertilizer, and they said, well, you've got a pretty good credit rating, and that shouldn't be a problem, but you know, we're really getting away from making farm loans. And I thought, now this is a community of 1,500 people, most of the businesses in town depend on farmers, and they aren't going to make farm loans anymore. So that's a problem for a small farmer, and it can be a problem for large farmers too. I know a couple of the panelists this morning and some of the public comments said that they hope to get their debts paid off so they could borrow more. And I thought, well, that's an awful way to have to live, isn't it? I mean, if you can't even do a job that you enjoy doing with your family, supporting the community, and you live from one loan to another, there's something really wrong with that. As a couple of the people this morning mentioned the reduction in milk prices of 50%. Well, that's quite a loss when you think about having your income cut in half. And I don't care what job you have. Think about if that were you. If tomorrow morning suddenly your paycheck was half of what it had been. We've talked, and it's been mentioned on this panel too, about consolidation in the industry. I think that has a lot to do with small farms going out of business. Now, I'm not a legal expert. I don't know a lot about the Capper-Volstead Act, but it seems to me from what I've read about it that paying volume premiums for milk is illegal under that act. And when you're getting more money just because you're big, that's not, as the act states, operated for the mutual benefit of all members. It's more benefit to the big members because they're getting paid more just because they're big. So that's a problem being small. Now, I'm glad to hear that there are a lot of choices where farmers can send their milk in some places. And Wisconsin is probably one of those places. There are still a lot of options, but a lot of parts of the United States, that's not the case. If you're not big enough, they're not going to come and pick you up. People would say, well, you know, that's not a good place for you to farm then. But that's really not true, because at one point there were options in most parts of Wisconsin, the northern part of the United States, everywhere to send milk. Somebody mentioned this morning there was literally a processing plant in every township. And a lot of people said that wasn't efficient, but it employed a lot of people. It produced local products. They were differentiated on different parts of the state, and it made small farmers and small communities a lot of money. And now we see this trend going back to this artisanal production. Swiss cheese from Monroe, Wisconsin, Italian cheeses from other parts of the state. But when that system was taken away from us, when farmers lost their local processing plants, we lost our options. We lost the ability for competition. I remember when I was a kid, my cousins, one day the Carnation truck would pick their milk up, and the next day it was the cheese factory down the road a few miles. Now, they had a pretty good idea what their milk was worth, because two separate entities were buying their milk. They got a test from each one on butterfat and protein. That's not allowed anymore. and someone earlier addressed the grade A licensing. Small farmers need an honest accounting of what they're producing. They need to get paid fairly, whether they're small or large, but they can't be discriminated against because they're small. I read an article the other night from the Iowa Independent, I think it was last week's issue, and it said government and industry experts are talking about volatility in the milk market, and they said it's because there's too much supply. And their solution for a remedy was that in time, enough producers will be forced out of business and the market will correct itself without government intervention. Now, I've been hearing that for the 30 years that I've been farming, that, well, eventually we'll get enough farmers out of business and then everything will be okay for everybody. And folks, it just hasn't worked yet. It just hasn't worked. True, a lot of small farmers went out of business, but from what we've heard today, the big farmers aren't doing too well either. And I guess I base a lot of it on the fact that the retail spread between farmer and consumer is not at all accurate anymore. There's no relationship between what consumers pay and what farmers get paid. Small farmers, are trying to find ways to stay in business. We got certified organic because we didn't want to get bigger. We wanted to stay small. We found a local cheese plant that we could send our milk to. We started direct marketing beef, and soon we'll be doing cheese. A lot of small farmers are trying to figure out a way to stay in business because they actually like farming. They actually like milking cows. Some farmers don't, and maybe their choice is to get big and hire people to do that for them. The land that we farm has been in our family since 1848, and so that means something to a lot of farmers too. I think imports is another issue that we haven't hit on yet on this panel, but it was mentioned this morning, and that doesn't just hurt small farmers, it hurts all farmers. When farm milk prices began to fall in 2008, they said, well, there's just too much milk, and that's why they're going down. But if you look at the government figures for imports, they were actually going up in 2008. Whether it was powdered milk, butter, milk fat. Cheese imports were actually increasing from the end of 2007 into 2008. And the amount of milk consumed in the United States, commercial disappearance, actually increased as well. So we were actually a milk deficit situation, and they were making more imports, but they said, well, there's too much milk and the price is going down. Now somebody's lying to us. And it needs to be investigated as to why they keep importing more and telling us we're producing too much. Now, we've been a milk deficit nation since 1996. And the trend has been, as was mentioned, small farmers are going to go out of business. We'll get weeded out first, but eventually it's going to get everybody. Eventually big farmers are going to suffer too. And we have to make room for everybody. Now, people have talked a lot about price volatility. Well, that can be a problem. It's nice to have a steady income. But as long as that volatility never drops below a cost of production, below a point where you can make money, it doesn't really concern me that much. If it wants to go really high, that's fine, but just don't let it go too low. We've talked about farmers protecting themselves with what are they calling it? Price stabilization. We're supposed to sell our milk on the futures contracts. Well, USDA did a study of that, I think it was a 3 years ago, and they found out that the farmers that sold their milk on futures contracts actually came out 50 cents a hundredweight behind those that didn't. The farmers that didn't sell on contracts had more volatility, but in the end, they made more money. And I guess I sort of look at it, it's kind of like Las Vegas, that town wasn't built on winners. And the industry seems to have a little bit better handle on milk and what it's going to be used for and how much of it there is than farmers do. So we're supposed to be competing against them and betting that we'll be smarter than they are. And it generally doesn't work. I think that, and there's a few people mentioned this morning in the public comments about local food, and I think this is something that small farmers are all sort of looking to as a strategy. USDA's come out with a Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food program. A lot of people say, well, you can't feed the world that way, and that's fine. We don't really need to feed the world. They can feed themselves if we let them, if they don't have too many wars and too many droughts, and we don't send our corporations in there to take all our natural resources and land base. I think we need to feed ourselves first, and until we do that, they're not going to be able to feed themselves. And I guess the final point that I'd like to mention is I think something that Pete mentioned about Walmart, and I've heard a few people in the hallways talking about how processors are really at the mercy of these huge grocery buyers. And that's probably true. That's probably true, that they tell you, this is what you will sell to me for, or we will not buy from you. But I don't think we're going to get ahead. We're not going to help farmers, and we're not going to help consumers if we let our cooperatives play the same game as the big processors. I think we have to be better than that. And I think cooperatives, instead of saying, well, we got to play the game, I think cooperatives need to look back to the principles of cooperatives. Fair treatment of all members, and the sixth principle of cooperatives, cooperation among cooperatives. I think they need to work together to say, we're not gonna drag ourselves down in the gutter like you. We're not going to put profit on top of the heap, because farmers are people, their lives have value, and so do consumers, and that's who we need to look out for.
Professor Cotterall? At the division, we spend a lot of time actually thinking about the size of firms. It comes up in various contexts. Obviously, it's often the argument's frequently made to us that a merger of firms will produce a larger firm that's more efficient. But it's also clear at times that the innovation and the entrepreneurship and the new ideas come from small firms, and you will frequently see in companies' documents that, look, if we get too big, a lot of that spark will go away. So as an economist, your thoughts on big, small, where we're going, where we're headed?
Well, actually, I'm going to do you a favor. Consolidate my comments on that very question under channel consolidation at the end. So I'll let other people go ahead.
All right, very good. All right, that's a clear sign. We're definitely going to get to the consolidation topic. Gerald Heatwell, very quickly. I'm going to sort of enforce the 2-minute rule.
2 minutes. I think this is a good question, and as a small farmer, I think there's several ways with boots on the ground that I would say are trends that we need to look at. One is the cost. We all experience this. I bought the farm in '84 from my wife's brother. Milked 29 cows then, just my family. Now with a partner, we milked 61 cows this morning, 2 families. My farm insurance is up 300%, nitrogen cost up 400%, county taxes up 500%, seed corn was 56 pound units in '85. I paid about $40 for. I paid $173 a unit average on my 80,000 unit corn seed. You all know about that. So economic costs are a huge driver in this, and I think that's something, whether it's your grocery store or your hardware, we need to look at as a society. Second driver that I would see is regulations. We're about regulated to death, and I'm disappointed that regulation is the first thing that we think of in terms of a solution. But, you know, nutrient management classes, record keeping, pesticide, herbicide classes, licenses, crop reporting, special requirements such as Chesapeake Bay, and I know you all have other things here, animal care requirements. Now it's EU requirements. Large customers have special PI, somatic cell requirements above that that's required in our PMO. Did I mention record keeping? You know, as a dairy farmer that's on the ground and does my work with my wife and partner, you know, I have a hard time getting done everything I need to do from 4:30 a.m. in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, every week of the year. And then, you know, I envy families that have multiple families in the farm, and they can put this record keeping on one person and spread it out, because as a small farm, if you're required to do all these things, it becomes an impossibility. The last thing I'd say is this hellish volatility that's been increasing since the mid-90s. And I know, you know, if there was an easy solution, somebody would have solved it, and we'd be glad to send them to the French Riviera or some other opulent place that, you know, I don't know about. We'd be glad to pay for their lavish lifestyle because ours would be so much better. But it's not, and only by working together as cooperatives of all sizes, of all types, coming together through organizations such as National Milk or National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, working together with USDA and the Secretary and others that have a vital interest in rural America and agriculture, will we have a chance to solve this. I, as an individual dairy farmer, small dairy farmer, have 0% chance. That's a guarantee of making it in this kind of an environment.
Bob Crop?
Well, quickly, what's small, what's large, I guess, is part of the definition. But if you look at the 2009 dairy farm structure provided by ERS, we find that farms that have less than 29 milk cows still constitutes over 30% of the dairy farms, and then under 50 cows actually added up about 49% of the dairy farms we have less than 50 milk cows. So we have a lot of small farms. We did lose about 38% of our farms between 2000 and 2009. If you take less than 50, that declined 34% less. There's actually been a bigger decline in that time period, though, between 50 to 99 cows. They actually went down about 45%. What's driving this? The trends are, one is, got a lot of small farms, older farmers going to retire. They got facilities that if somebody's going to milk on, need to be fixed up. There's some of that going on. We got a number of those that say milk in 50, 75, 90 cows. If they're going to stay in business, they may have a son or daughter who wants to come in. They're going to modernize, fix it up. Facilities are outdated. Probably put a freestall milk and parlor in, which means they're going to go 175, 200, maybe 300, 400 cows. Not all 1,000-cow operations. And I guess the other is a change in lifestyle. I think that's important. There's a lot of young people talk about getting farming. I teach a farm short course class. A lot of kids that are going back to farm. Most of them say, well, I like to have time off and vacation and be more involved in the community, so a larger farm operation that supports more than one family allows some of that. But I think the bottom line is, and you heard that this morning from our Secretary of Agriculture of Wisconsin, diversity, and that's really the strength in Wisconsin. There are opportunities for small farms with this 50 cows or so, but they probably have to do something different than just produce milk. They're grazers, maybe they're an organic, maybe they're selling to one of the specialty cheese plants that add value to that rather than just selling milk. And if that's what they want to do and do not want to invest a lot of capital and machinery in that, you can do that. And we have the larger farms that can do it as well. So diversity, I think, is our key. But whatever you do, it's a business, it's got to be well managed, what have you, and to assist some of the smaller farms is something we're doing in Wisconsin with business planning grants. The farmers can do business planning, grants for value-added things of this sort, some support activities for them to make a change in their operation. But the trend will be fewer farms. The average size farm in Wisconsin is still only 91 cows. Nationwide is about 145 cows.
This spring, the Department of Agriculture made a change to the producer-handler regulations in a manner that reduced the number of farms that qualified for that part of the regulatory structure. Obviously, how that plays out remains to be seen, but I will ask Mark Pepperzak to offer his thoughts on that topic.
Well, unfortunately, I've had a firsthand lesson that rather than innovating and adapting to meet evolving market demand, the dominant cooperatives and processors use the federal order system in anti-competitive ways to advance their interests, reduce competition, protect their market share through this action. As both dairy farmer and processors, in other words, as a producer-handler doing both, we're well positioned to innovate and compete to satisfy market demand trends for differentiated products such as organic milk, traceable milk, high omega-3 milk, whatever. The marketplace wants fully traceable, innovative milk products of consistently high quality. The dairy industry's traditional producer to cooperative to processor pooled bottle has a hard time satisfying this demand for full traceabilities, something that producer handlers can do. We became a producer handler in order to assume control of both the milk supply and conditions under which it was processed. There were limited supplies of organic milk in Colorado. There was a pooling cost issue, of course, and we assumed that risk and we bear the cost of balancing ourselves. But most importantly, we were able to control the quality all the way to the customers. The producer-handler option let us operate. Don't mean anything in the organic world except that they charge us. Being a producer-handler allowed us to devote our resources to serving our market rather than burdening our customers with the cost of pooling. The federal order system is controlled by and benefits a very small number of very large, powerful cooperatives and processors through the use of full supply contracts, arcane and non-transparent milk pricing structures, Byzantine pool access requirements, and block voting. Basically, they've got the scope and scale to make the thing work. People think we're large, we're relatively small. We don't have that scope and scale. We can't play the game. As the demand of the dominant cooperatives and processors, USDA recently eliminated producer-handler status for producers like us and, frankly, new innovative future competitors who could use the same system to bring to market differentiated products. The producer-handler's experience shows that dairy's dominant market participants will not tolerate economic competition. So, in summary, what I'm saying is the dominant processors and co-ops, quite frankly, brought about the change. Been there for 70 years because they didn't like the competition. It was anti-competition at its best.
Jim Goodman, your perspective on the issue?
I think I'll just pass because I talked quite a while on my last thing, but I guess the one comment I would make is that I'm a fan of small. You know, I think that's, as Dr. Kropp said, one of the things that we need to look at. And if a producer in the producer-handler situation can be more competitive, if he can make more money, put it into the community, you know, I guess that's good. So, but really, it's not an issue that I put a lot of time into thinking about. So I'll just move that on to someone else who can talk about it a little more.
Fair enough. I'm going to do what moderators sometimes do with some trepidation, but I'm going to call a little bit of an audible on my panel because I do want to make sure Professor Cotterall has time to talk about the channel, and I'll give a brief segue and then turn it over to the experts. The bulk of the discussion thus far obviously has been in what, as antitrust enforcers, we would call the upstream market or the producer market, how that's structured, how it's regulated or not regulated, the role of USDA, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked very little thus far on this panel about the role of the downstream market, which is what's going on in the processing structure and what's going on in the retailing structure. And here, I'll turn it over to Professor Cotterall and then segue over into Professor Carstensen and some of the other panelists where we can both talk about the regulatory issues and also give the panelists a chance to turn some focus on the moderator and talk about the antitrust issues.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for being here and also listening to everybody. And I like to interact with people that have come before me to give you perspective on some of these issues, because not everybody agrees with everybody here. So I'm going to highlight some of the differences, and I'll say some things that are perhaps new. First of all, I'd like to motivate my talk of channel consolidation with the notion of efficiency. It's always amazed me how in the dairy marketing channel, the dairy farmer is probably the most efficient member of that channel, having tremendous efficiency gains over the last 30 or 40 years, absolutely amazing efficiency gains. But has the dairy farmer been able to capture any of that in terms of any kind of stable return? And the answer is no. And then the processors and the retailers look at the dairy farmer and say, well, you're not making any money because you're not efficient. And then these same people go to the Justice Department and say, you should allow our mergers, you should allow us to combine and do these different things because they are efficiency enhancing. We are efficient. And the answer there is show us, please. Because the antitrust laws say that they not only have to show you that they're efficient, they also have to show that they pass it on either to consumers or farmers, the two ends of the system. They're supposed to be competitive, and they're supposed to reward people at both ends of the channel. They should show us where the money is. So my advice to the Justice Department on channel consolidation is that merger policy has been broken for at least 10 years, if not 20 or 30. Fix it first is a description of when somebody comes for a merger. You allow them to negotiate and spin off and divest. Fix it first doesn't work because the Justice Department has no good way of evaluating what the spin-off assets are. They should look carefully at fix it first, and in the first instance, they shouldn't do it. The other thing that they should, the idea of no second bite is that these companies come before justice in the Federal Trade Commission, like a Stop and Shop retailer in New England acquired its horizontal competitor in '96, and I was part of a Fix It First that spun off $500 million of grocery stores, what we thought would preserve competition, and they promised that, in fact, they would lower prices. Well, the Fix It First didn't work, and 3 years later, they come back to the Federal Trade Commission in New York City and want to acquire Pathmark. And we went and looked at what happened to prices after the '96 one, and we found that prices went up, not down, after the merger in New England. And we said to the Federal Trade Commission, no second bite at the apple. They can't come to you and argue efficiency, and we're going to pass it on to the consumer when they didn't do it the last time. And if justice just instituted that rule, somebody like Dean or Suiza, we wouldn't have the mergers that we've had in the last 10 years. We would not have them. I believe that firmly, if they just instituted a no second bite rule against that company. Then with regards to justice, one of the things in antitrust is they have to define the market. It's absolutely critical in a monopolization case or a merger case to define the market. And we've had, just on this panel, two very radical, different implicit definitions of the market. Bob Kropp has told you cooperatives don't have a big share of the market. They only got 14%, 9%, or whatever else. Implicit in Bob's market shares is a national market for fluid milk, a national market for cheese. And then Mark from Colorado says we only have one buyer. Implicit in his definition is the state of Colorado is a market, one buyer. Why can't Mark go sell to somebody in Chicago or New York or Boston? You know? So my point is that the Justice Department needs to very carefully define these markets. And with all due respect, we don't have a national fluid market for fluid milk in this country. Markets are still regional. Cheese, butter, perhaps, okay? But that would be it. Okay, then let's go on to the issue. Another thing that everybody has said here is we really don't like the processors. We really don't like the retailers. Farm prices are low and retail prices don't respond. And we really, what is going on? And then we've also heard that cooperatives are the countervailing power, that cooperatives are farmers' last hope for exercising power against these powerful people. Well, let's take that to task. First of all, generally in economic theory, the notion of countervailing power has been disproved in many theoretical contexts and in some practical empirical ones. Countervailing power, where you have two, say, monopolists going against each other head to head in a market, a buyer and a seller, crashing heads. That's supposed to be countervailing power. But what happens is they coalesce and they exploit the two ends, the consumers and the farmers. There's coalescing power as well. It's a distinct possibility in theory and in practice in the dairy industry. I think we've seen that in many of our regional markets. And one of the more unsettling things I've ever had in my professional career as an agricultural marketing economist is in 2003, I was at the Federal Marketing Orders Administrators Conference in Newport, Rhode Island, and I spoke about these kind of issues to probably 200 people in the room. And afterwards, Rick Smith got up, who was at the time the CEO of Dairy Lee and the head of DMS. It was just been formed. And Smith basically said to the group, he said, look, that is not the way co-ops are going to behave in the future. We are not going to fight with these people in the channel. We are going to go for channel efficiency. We're going to work with these people for efficiency. Think about that for a minute. And where does that leave the idea of a cooperative as the farmer's representative? Just think about it. All right. So let's go next to the issue of cheap food policy in this country. I would submit that cheap food policy is bankrupt. Who's food cheap for? Cheap food is the notion that the farm price in the market is low because possibly of federal subsidies, also because of possibly buyer power against them. Farmers are getting low prices. So cheap for who? Well, I would submit that the lion's share of that cheapness and the low market price that you're receiving stays with the processor and the retailer. You're quite right there that the retail prices are not responsive. So it's cheap by and large for corporate America. And now let's think about that for a minute. Cheap food for them, that means they get innovated compared to you on farm. You produce a wholesome product at a low price. They've innovated by massive product differentiation and a great number of different varieties of products. And quite frankly, the result has been expensive food to the American consumer. Food is not cheap. And we have an obesity epidemic. Corporate America produces food that makes us fat. We have health costs that are everybody's damaging charge. Overweight people are less healthy. So what does this mean? It means that farmers have a natural ally with consumers for a healthy, low-cost product that generates health. I think that you need to look forward all the way to the White House and the woman that's in the White House as an ally for the kind of things you're saying. Another thing about the market channel in supermarkets over the last 20 years, there's been a massive shift in the way milk is priced. It's commonly known. 20 years ago, milk was often a lost leader, something that was sold low to bring people into the store. Now milk is a cash cow. Milk is the largest product in the American supermarket by sales volume in dollars. It is. It's also the most profitable in many supermarkets. They have margins of 40% now. 45% are common, whereas 20 years ago, the margins were 20%. You're quite right that, in fact, that the margin has expanded in those areas more than cost have justified it. It's fundamentally a shift in the way they price milk. Well, what else? Flat milk pricing. You've probably never heard of that, but at the University of Connecticut, we've watched it for several years in the Northeast. The idea that supermarkets in the Northeast charge the same price for a gallon of skim milk as 1%, 2% in whole. They're all like $3.49 a gallon. Now, what does that tell you about competition if competition is based on cost? Because every farmer in this room knows skim milk is much cheaper than whole milk. There is no competition. That pricing is not competitive pricing. That should stop because it does not reward the consumer or give the opportunity for them to buy lower cost, healthier milk. Flat milk pricing is a policy that should stop. Well, what do we see? Basically, another thing I see here that's been talked about a lot is the notion that the last year and a half we've had low prices, and before that we had very high prices, and the idea of a cycle that's getting progressively more violent in terms of its swings. I think that's related to the change in the structure of America's dairy farms. I don't have clear evidence. I'm not a production function economist, but I would raise the issue of the overproduction trap. It's a classic area in ag policy that if a dairy farmer has a lot of, say, leverage on the farm, or if the dairy farmer has a lot of cash inputs and is being squeezed because of higher cost, and these kinds of phenomena might be very true on a 5,000 or a 10,000 cow farm where the banker is an integral part in the operation. It could also be true on a small farm where the banker is part of the operation. But I think by and large, a lot of the leverage is on the larger farms. A lot of the larger farms also buy a lot of their inputs, and are unless they're very savvy in futures market hedging of corn and soybeans, they're going to get stuck a year ago on that kind of high price cycle there. And that probably is exacerbated in dairy because these people have no choice but to cover their cash cost is by expanding production, not shrinking. So I think the shift in the structure of the industry towards more leverage and more input cost in these larger industrialized farms has created the kind of swing that we see. That's a hypothesis. I don't have hard research on it, but it should be looked at. Another thing that I would say, earlier people have said that the CME needs to be fixed. That if the CME were fixed, dairy's problems would be solved. Now, that might be true if you're producing for the cheese market in Wisconsin, okay? But coming from the East Coast, where we're mostly for the fluid market, it's not true at all. Because, quite frankly, the CMA does not set the fluid market price. Since 1987, with the relaxation of federal market orders to a minimum floor, the fluid market price every month is basically the class minimum plus what Bob has mentioned and everybody knows is the overorder premium, or coalesce with the processors to set the fluid market price in all the markets in the United States today. It's been that way since '87. For better or for worse, that's how that price is set. So fixing the CME is not going to fix the fluid milk market price because it's the CME plus the overorder premium, the CME as is reflected into the class 1 mover, all right? So just understand that, you know, fixing the CME is not everything to the dairy farmer. Well, so where are we at? It's clear we need a higher price via a larger share of the consumer's dollar. There's no doubt about that. This question is just how to do it. We also need a more stable price. There's no question about that as well. And I think that we need a competitive market channel for efficiency in that. Antitrust can give us a competitive market channel. It can. Through increased enforcement, I'm a skeptic of enforcement. I think, frankly, the Justice Department could bring 10 cases in this industry and they'd probably lose 8. It's very, very hard in federal courts to prevail. I think there's probably going to need to be changes in the underlying antitrust law. So I was very encouraged to hear Senator Cole and Feingold say they're willing to do that. Because I think we're going to be there quicker, and the quicker the better than you think. So what else? There's the issue of social justice, or the issue of the health of rural America. It was interesting to hear Secretary Vilsack say that 10% of the population is rural and 45% of the people serving in our military are rural people. I think rural people do have a very fundamental American set of values beyond even serving in the military. I think it's worth keeping because I think we raise good people in rural America, not that we don't in urban America. Urban America raises tougher people. I think rural America raises more moral people, or people with more of a notion of what's good or bad. So if you want a cynic, look for a kid from Brooklyn. If you want a greenhorn, look for a kid from a farm in upstate New York. So that's it. On fair trade for rural America, I think there's still a role for something like the milk program that provides subsidies for smaller farms, farms with less than 150 cows. I think there's a place for that until we figure out a lot of this other thing. I think there's a place for organic milk to protect small farms that want to do that. And I think that in terms of policies for a market channel, I've suggested something that politically is probably extremely unpalatable because IDFA has fought it tooth and nail in Vermont. It's now fighting it in New Jersey, and probably would fight it elsewhere. That's the notion of collecting some kind of a fee from the retailer and paying it back to the milk shed. If the retailer and the processor have such a wide margin, 30 cents a gallon times 11.6, you figure it out, on fluid milk, that's over $3 a hundredweight. You could do it nationwide, okay? If you want to go after the margin in the channel, that's one thing. And you would put it with something like the New York State price gouging law, which says that retail prices can be no more than something like 200% of the farm price. And it's not a fixed thing. It's just that if they are above that, then the agency is empowered to go to the retailer and say, please justify your costs. Because if you're a retailer in Manhattan, perhaps maybe more than twice the farm price is justified because of the extremely high retailing costs. But it gives the retailers on notice that, in fact, somebody is looking at margins. And so that is an option. And if you're really talking about going after the margin kind of thing, you're going to have to do something like that. And like I said, International Dairy Foods will fight that tooth and nail, as will some people like the Food Marketing Institute. And I want to tell you how powerful they are. This is the last thing, and I'll be quiet. In 2003, Peter and I were invited by Senator Cole and Senator Leahy down to the Senate Judiciary Committee to, Peter and I, we had a great day. We went in there, and we went forwards and backwards on this. If you read my testimony, it reads like a roadmap for what's happened since with the issues of vertical power and exercising of corporate power against farmers and consumers. After the senators had got done bouncing us around, Peter and I got up and turned around and looked at the room, and there were about 200 people in this hearing. And if looks could kill, every one of them would have had a knife through our heart. And I turned to Peter and said, Peter, we just filled their political contribution coffers. There was nobody there from farmers. There was nobody there from consumers. The room was full of lobbyists for the food industry. And that's how hard a battle you will have, because they are extremely powerful. But it is ultimately in dairy a political answer. It's not an economic answer to get these markets to work better for you and for the American economy. Thank you.
Well, predictably, given the level of talent and experience on the panel today, we did not cover everything, but their answers did a terrific job of weaving in all of the issues and demonstrating that, in fact, look, these issues are not unitary or insular or singular. They are, in fact, related. All of these gentlemen took substantial time to come here today, so I'd just like to express our appreciation to them and turn it over to the next panel. Thank you.